I was 25 years old when everything I knew washed away. Being the only son of my family carried a strange weight even before the disaster. My parents always reminded me that someday I would be the one to carry our name, to look after what they had built, and keep our small home alive with laughter and memories. I grew up in a village where life was simple. Our days followed the rhythm of the seasons, and though we did not have much in terms of wealth, we had enough. The fields stretched green in the summer. The air always smelled of earth and firewood, and the sound of neighbors calling each other's names across courtyards gave me a sense of belonging that I thought could never be broken. Our house wasn't grand, but it was ours. Its mud walls held years of stories. I knew every corner, every crack, every old creak in the wooden doors. I could still hear my mother's voice calling me to dinner and my father's footsteps in the early morning as he set off for work. There was a warmth in knowing that home was always there, a solid place I could return to at the end of each day. That was my life, steady, ordinary, safe. But safety is fragile. One evening, the sky turned dark in a way that didn't feel natural. Heavy clouds rolled in, and the first drops of rain carried with them a sense of warning. At first, we all thought it was just another storm, the kind that visits every monsoon season. But then the rain thickened, pounding the ground with force that seemed endless. Hours passed, then a full night, and the water did not stop falling. Soon, the river that had always been the lifeblood of our village turned into a monster, swelling and roaring louder with every passing minute. I remember the first screams. People were rushing, mothers clutching their children, men trying to move carts of food and belongings. The floodwater pushed into the village streets as if it owned them. I stood at my doorway, frozen, watching the water climb higher and higher against the walls. In seconds, it was inside, pooling across the floor where I had once sat cross-legged to eat. Panic broke through my chest, but still I tried to hold on. My father's voice echoed in my head. Protect the house. Yet how could I? The water was merciless. When the wall finally gave way, it felt like a piece of my soul had cracked with it. The force of flood tore through the rooms, dragging with it clothes, furniture, memories, all of it gone in moments. I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the roar of rushing water. My feet splashed through the rising current as I tried to salvage something, anything, but it was useless. The house collapsed before my eyes. The place I called my world reduced to broken mud and floating debris. I can't explain the feeling of watching your home fall apart while you're still standing there, powerless. It is as if someone rips away the ground beneath your feet, and suddenly you don't belong anywhere. I wasn't just losing a structure. I was losing the smell of my mother's cooking, the warmth of my father's hand on my shoulder, the laughter of evenings spent under the stars. Everything that had anchored me was gone, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly homeless. The flood swallowed much of the village, but in its chaos, the government responded quickly. Trucks and rescue boats arrived, carrying army men and police officers who shouted orders, pulled children onto their shoulders, and helped the elderly climb into safety. I remember being let out of the water by one of them, his grip firm on my arm, as if to remind me that even when the world crumbles, someone will reach out. They brought us to higher ground, where temporary shelters were being erected. The camps weren't much, rows of tents, makeshift kitchens, long queues for food, but in those moments, they felt like salvation. People huddled together under canvas roofs, strangers becoming family in shared loss. I found myself among them, carrying nothing but the clothes on my back and the weight of a broken home in my heart. Everywhere I turned, I saw faces streaked with mud and tears, yet also carrying a fragile spark of survival. I laid down on a thin mat that night, staring at the ceiling of the tent, the sound of crying children and murmuring families all around me. My body was safe, but my mind was restless. The silence inside me screamed louder than the storm outside. I was the only son, but now without a house, I had nothing to give my family. The burden pressed down on me, and I felt a hollow emptiness I had never known before. That was my new reality. Living in a camp, waiting for news, waiting for tomorrow, waiting for a life that felt like it had ended with a flood. I didn't know then that this brokenness would lead me to someone who would change the course of my story. The camp became my world. Rows of tents stretched across the muddy ground. each one crowded with families who had brought whatever little they could salvage. The air carried a mix of grief and survival. People crying for what was gone, yet clinging to the comfort of being alive. Some mothers rocked their children, whispering soft prayers. Old men sat silently, staring into the distance as though they were watching their entire past dissolve before their eyes. At night, the camp was restless. Babies cried. Women murmured in low voices. Men whispered anxiously about the future. The thin walls of fabric could not hide anyone's sorrow. Grief was shared whether we liked it or not. And yet, in the middle of all that brokenness, there were small moments of comfort. Strangers offering food to each other, hands reaching out to adjust blankets, someone lighting a lantern so others could see in the darkness. We were all drowning in loss, but somehow, together, we were still afloat. For me, the loneliness was sharper. Being the only son of my family, I felt the weight more heavily. My parents had always leaned on me for strength, but now, with our home gone, what was I supposed to offer them? At night, when I lay on the rough bedding provided by the volunteers, I kept replaying the collapse of my house in my mind. The walls crumbling, the water rushing in, the helplessness that swallowed me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it all again, and my chest tightened until I had to sit up just to breathe. During the day, I tried to distract myself by watching the soldiers and police officers who worked tirelessly around the camp. They moved with a kind of discipline I admired, yet their exhaustion was visible in their eyes. Some carried heavy boxes of supplies, others comforted frightened children, and a few were busy repairing broken tents after strong winds tore them apart. They barely rested, yet not a single complaint slipped from their mouths. One police officer, in particular, caught my attention. I noticed him often, moving between the tents, checking on people, making sure no one went hungry. His uniform was always dusty, his face lined with fatigue, but there was something gentle about the way he spoke to people. He would kneel down to talk to children at their level, or quietly hand over his own food to an old man who seemed too weak to stand in line. He wasn't just doing a job. He was caring, almost like he carried everyone's pain on his shoulders. I never spoke to him at first, only observed from a distance. He was older than me, maybe in his early 30s, with a kind of strength that wasn't loud but steady. There were moments when I could see how tired he was. He would rub his forehead, stretch his back, or close his eyes for a second longer than normal when he thought no one was watching. But even then, the moment someone called his name, he was up again, ready to serve. Seeing him work made me think about my own role. I had always believed being the only son meant I was strong, dependable, the one my family could turn to. But here I was, helpless, relying on strangers to feed me and give me shelter. The guilt stung. I envied the officer's strength, the way people looked at him with gratitude. He gave them hope, while I barely had any left for myself. Yet, despite all the sadness around me, a part of me kept searching for something to hold on to. Maybe it was human nature, to keep looking for a light, no matter how faint. Some mornings, when the sun broke through the clouds and spilled golden light across the muddy camp, I felt a strange flicker of hope. Maybe life wasn't entirely lost. Maybe from the ruins, something new could grow. Still, fear lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. What if we never rebuilt our home? What if my family never found stability again? What if I stayed stuck here, in this limbo of tense and uncertainty? Every question only deepened the hollow inside me. And yet, every time my eyes landed on that officer, moving quietly among the people, something steadied in me. I didn't know his name, but his presence was like a reminder that not everything was destroyed. Strength still existed. Kindness still existed. Humanity was still alive, even in the wreckage. One evening, as I sat on the edge of the tent, watching the camp lights flicker against the dark sky, I saw him again. He was helping a woman carry water containers, his movements tired but unwavering. When their task was done, he lingered near the tents, scanning the area as if making sure everyone was safe. For a moment, his eyes swept across the crowd and met mine. It wasn't more than a glance, but I felt it. An acknowledgement, a silent connection between two people lost in the same storm. I looked away quickly, embarrassed, but the warmth of that glance stayed with me. It wasn't much, yet it meant something. In a world that felt shattered, even the smallest threads of connection mattered. That night, as I lay on my mat with the sounds of rain still dripping outside the camp, I thought about it more than I thought about my broken home. I didn't understand why, but perhaps my heart was searching for something beyond survival, for a reason to believe again, for a presence that made me feel less alone. The night the camp grew cold felt different from the others. The air was damp and restless, carrying the smell of wet earth and smoke from the small fires people had lit outside their tents. Children whimpered in their sleep, mothers hummed soft lullabies, and every now and then the distant howl of a dog or the cry of someone unable to hold back their grief broke through the uneasy quiet. I lay awake on my mat, staring at the canvas roof above me, the chill seeping into my bones. Sleep wouldn't come. It rarely did anymore. I turned on my side, hugging myself, wishing for the warmth of the home I had lost. My thoughts kept circling back to the same place. Emptiness. My house gone. My sense of belonging gone. I wondered how long we would live like this, if we would ever rebuild, if I would ever feel whole again. The loneliness was so heavy that it almost felt like another person lying beside me, pressing into my chest, stealing the air from my lungs. I didn't hear him approach until his shadow stretched across the dim lamplight inside the tent. I looked up, startled, and saw the police officer standing there. His uniform looked worn, his face lined with exhaustion. He gave me a small, almost apologetic smile before he spoke. "Can I?" His voice was low, careful. "Can I sleep here? Just for a while. I'm exhausted, and the other side is too crowded." For a moment, I froze. No one had ever asked me something like that before. This was my space, small as it was, and letting someone in felt strange. My instinct was to say no, but when I looked at him again, I saw more than fatigue. There was a kind of loneliness in his eyes, one that mirrored my own. Slowly, I nodded. "Okay," I whispered. He slipped inside quietly, careful not to disturb the others nearby. He lay down a short distance from me, stretching his tired body across the mat, and let out a deep breath that sounded like relief. For a while, we didn't speak. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the faint hum of the camp outside. Then he turned slightly, his voice breaking through the stillness. "You're young," he said softly. "About 25? I blinked in surprise. "Yes." He gave a small nod. "You remind me of myself when I was your age, before all this responsibility." His eyes flicked to the tent roof, as if he was seeing something far away. Then he looked at me again. "Do you still have family here?" I swallowed, my throat tight. "Yes, but our home is gone. We're all scattered in the camp now." His expression softened, sadness creasing the corners of his eyes. "I'm sorry. Losing your home, it changes everything. It takes away the ground under your feet." I looked at him, surprised at how closely his words matched the ache inside me. He understood. "Somehow." "What about you?" I asked quietly. "Don't you have a family?" He let out a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "My family is a uniform now. I've been serving for years. Most days, I'm too busy helping others to think about myself. But sometimes it's lonely. Duty doesn't hug you back at night." Something about the way he said it tugged at me. His honesty was raw, not the kind of words you'd expect from someone in uniform. We fell into a gentle rhythm of conversation, our voices low so as not to disturb the sleeping camp. He asked about my village, and I found myself telling him stories about the fields, about the festivals, about the nights under the stars before the flood changed everything. In turn, he told me about his work, the long hours, the exhaustion, the constant pressure to be strong for others even when he felt weak himself. At one point, he turned onto his side, facing me, his eyes soft in the dim glow. "If you ever feel lonely," he murmured, "you can come with me, to my place, when all this is over. You don't have to carry it alone." The words sank into me like warmth on a freezing night. I didn't know how to respond. No one had ever said something like that to me, not in such a personal way. My chest tightened, but not from grief. Something else was stirring, something I couldn't quite name. We grew quieter after that, the conversation fading into comfortable silence. I could feel the closeness between us, invisible but strong, like an unseen thread tying us together in the dark. My loneliness didn't feel quite so heavy anymore. Then I felt it, his hand, gentle on my shoulder. At first, it was just a light touch, almost hesitant, as if asking permission. My body stiffened, but then I relaxed. There was no force in his touch, only warmth. His fingers moved slowly, tracing comfort into my skin, calming the storm inside me. He leaned closer, his breath brushing against my ear. My heart pounded, unsure, nervous, but not afraid. His hand slid beneath the edge of my shirt, warm against the cold skin of my back. I shivered, not from fear, but from the tenderness of it. When his lips touched mine, it was not harsh or demanding. It was soft, almost fragile, as though he was afraid I might break. The kiss was brief, gentle, carrying more comfort than passion. My eyes closed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the world grew quiet. I don't know how long we stayed like that, close, but not crossing into anything more. The night stretched on, and in the midst of all the sorrow and uncertainty around us, there was a strange, fragile peace between us. For the first time since the flood, I felt that maybe I wasn't completely alone. When the kiss ended, I lay there frozen, my heart racing as if I had just run for miles. My lips still tingled with the memory of his touch, but my mind was a storm. I didn't know what to feel. Shock and comfort collided inside me, battling for control. Part of me wanted to pull away, to remind myself that this wasn't normal, that I didn't know him well enough. But another part, stronger, quieter, didn't want the warmth to fade. I had spent weeks wrapped in the cold grip of loneliness, drowning in grief, clutching nothing but the memory of what I had lost. And now, here was someone who reached out in that darkness, not to take, but to give something I didn't know I needed. I turned my head slightly, catching his eyes in the dim glow of the lantern outside the tent. He didn't look away. His gaze wasn't heavy or forceful. It was steady, searching, almost as if he was waiting for me to tell him it was okay. Why are you being so kind to me? I whispered, my voice shaking. He exhaled softly, his hand still resting lightly on my shoulder. Because I see the way you carry yourself. You've lost a lot, but you don't complain. You keep it all inside, like you have to be strong for everyone. I know what that feels like. Sometimes strength just means holding on until someone else notices you're slipping. His words hit something deep inside me. He wasn't wrong. I had been trying so hard to appear strong, even though inside I was crumbling. Hearing someone else speak that truth out loud made the tears sting in my eyes. I turned away, hoping he wouldn't see. You're not alone, he added quietly. Not anymore. I'm here. The simplicity of it nearly broke me. No one had said that to me since the flood. Everyone was too busy surviving, too busy grieving their own losses. I had convinced myself I had to fight this emptiness by myself. But here was this man, worn and tired from his own battles, telling me that he wouldn't let me carry the weight alone. We spoke in low voices through the night, our words weaving together a fragile thread of trust. I told him about my home, how I had grown up with nothing, but still felt rich in love, how losing the house felt like losing part of myself. He listened, really listened, his eyes never leaving mine. In return, he told me about his years in service, the endless nights, the families he had helped, the funerals he had attended for those who didn't make it. Sometimes, he confessed, I wonder if anyone really sees me. Not the uniform, not the job, just me. I understood then that his closeness wasn't about desire. It wasn't lust driving his actions, but something deeper, an ache to be seen, to be human in a world that demanded so much of him. And maybe in his eyes, I was a reminder he needed that connection still existed, even in broken places. As the night stretched on, the fear that had knotted in my chest slowly unraveled. I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel used. Instead, I felt strangely safe. His hand, resting lightly on my back, didn't push or demand anything more. It simply stayed there, steady, like an anchor keeping me from drifting too far into my own despair. I don't know what will happen tomorrow, I admitted, my voice trembling. Sometimes I feel like there's no future left for me. He shook his head gently. The future doesn't come all at once. It comes one breath at a time. And as long as you're still breathing, there's hope. I've seen people rebuild from nothing, stronger than before. You will too. I'll make sure of it. His certainty startled me. It wasn't empty comfort. It was a promise, a quiet vow spoken in the middle of the night, yet it carried more weight than any reassurance I'd heard since the flood. For the first time, I let myself lean into the warmth of another person without fear of being hurt. I rested my head lightly against his shoulder, hesitating at first, then relaxing when he shifted closer, wrapping a protective arm around me. His heartbeat was steady beneath my ear, a rhythm that calmed the chaos in my mind. The camp outside was still restless, the sound of coughing, babies stirring, the low murmur of voices. But inside that small space, I felt a stillness I hadn't known in weeks. It was as if the world had pressed pause, giving me a chance to simply exist without being crushed by everything I had lost. I didn't know what we were or what this meant. All I knew was that the fear I had carried into that tent had slowly been replaced by something else. Comfort, trust, and unexpected bond of a man who had walked into my life when I least expected it. As I drifted between wakefulness and sleep, one thought repeated itself in my mind. Maybe healing doesn't always come in the way we imagine. Sometimes it comes in the form of a stranger's kindness, in the warmth of a hand on your shoulder, in the softness of a kiss meant not to take, but to give. That night, I wasn't just surviving anymore. For the first time since the flood, I felt alive. The days after that night felt different, though the camp itself had not changed. The same rows of tents stretched across the muddy field, the same long lines for food, the same tired faces trying to hold on. But inside me, something had shifted. The heaviness of loneliness wasn't as sharp anymore, because now there was someone who saw me. The officer became a quiet presence in my days. He never made a show of it, never acted as though he was doing me a favor. But I began to notice the little things he did. He would appear near me when the food was being distributed, making sure I had enough to eat before moving on to help someone else. When my tent's rope loosened after a windy night, he was there, tightening the knot with practiced hands, then giving me a small smile before walking away. Once, when I coughed for too long, he pressed a packet of medicine into my palm without a word. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but it kept happening. And slowly, I began to look forward to those moments. The sight of him moving across the camp, his uniform dusty and his shoulders square despite exhaustion, stirred something inside me that I couldn't name. Just knowing he might come by made the long hours of waiting easier to bear. Others noticed, too. Some of the men teased him lightly when they saw us talking, though it was never cruel. A few of the women smiled knowingly, as if they understood something I hadn't yet admitted to myself. But no one questioned his kindness, because he gave it freely to others as well. He was simply the kind of man who carried people's burdens without asking for thanks. Still, I could feel the difference in the way he lingered near me, in the way his eyes softened when they met mine. Gratitude was the first seed that grew inside me. Gratitude for his patience, his quiet strength, his way of making me feel less invisible. But gratitude soon deepened into trust. I began to open up to him more, telling him about my fears of the future, about how useless I felt not being able to provide for my family. He never dismissed my feelings or told me to be stronger. He simply listened, nodding, sometimes sharing a story of his own. One evening, as we sat near the edge of the camp, watching the sun sink into the horizon, he spoke more openly than I had ever heard him. His voice was low, carrying the weight of years unspoken. "My life," he said, "has been the uniform. I joined young, full of fire, ready to serve. And I've carried people out of floods, fought in riots, stood guard when others slept. I don't regret it. But sometimes, when the night is quiet, I wonder what I've missed. Birthdays with my family, laughing with friends, waking up in a home that was mine." He picked up a small stone and rolled it between his fingers. "The truth is, service takes everything from you. You give and give until there's nothing left for yourself. And the world, it thanks you for a moment, then forgets. You learn to live with loneliness, but it never really leaves." I looked at him then, and for the first time, I didn't just see the officer, the strong figure who carried others' burdens. I saw the man beneath the uniform, the tired eyes, the hidden wounds, the quiet ache of someone who had sacrificed too much. Without thinking, I reached out and touched his hand. He glanced at me in surprise, but didn't pull away. For a moment, we simply sat there, the silence between us no longer empty, but full of something unspoken. From then on, our bond grew in small but certain ways. He didn't need to say much. His presence spoke enough. I, too, began to show my care in small gestures, saving a portion of food for him when I noticed he hadn't eaten, offering to share my blanket when the nights grew too cold, listening to his stories with the same patience he gave me. It was strange how tragedy had brought us together. I had lost my home, the walls that had sheltered me all my life. He had lost his freedom, the simple warmth of being seen as more than his duty. In the rubble of our losses, we found each other. The more time I spent with him, the more I realized that healing doesn't always come in grand ways. Sometimes it comes in the shape of another person's steady hand, or in the sound of their voice reminding you that you matter. Sometimes it comes in quiet companionship, in the way someone sits beside you even when you have nothing to offer in return. I no longer counted the days in the camp by meals or announcements. I counted them by moments with him. His smile when he caught me watching, the softness in his eyes when he spoke about things that hurt, the way his presence steadied me when my own thoughts threatened to pull me under. I still miss my home, and I still carried the weight of everything I had lost. But with him, the grief felt bearable, like a heavy load shared between two people instead of crushing one alone. In his company, I discovered that healing was not about forgetting what was gone, but about finding new reasons to keep moving forward. And maybe, just maybe, he was becoming one of those reasons. The weeks slowly passed, and the camp began to change. What had once been a place of mourning and confusion now shifted toward something resembling resilience. Government trucks rolled in carrying building materials, while officials spoke of plans for rehabilitation. Families began to leave, returning to their villages to rebuild broken walls and mend shattered lives. I watched them go with a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that life was moving forward, that people were finding their way back to the fragments of normalcy. But fear lingered in me, heavy and stubborn. Where would I go? My house had collapsed completely, reduced to rubble and mud. I had no savings, no resources, no plan. I was the only son of my family, yet I felt powerless to fulfill that role. One evening, as the camp grew quieter with fewer people, I sat alone outside my tent. The officer came to stand beside me, as he often did, his hands resting lightly on his hips. For a while, we both watched the smoke from distant fires rise into the sky. Finally, he spoke. "You're worried about where to go," he said softly, not as a question, but as a truth he had already seen in my eyes. I didn't answer right away. The knot in my chest was too tight. But then, with a voice that trembled more than I wished, I admitted, "I don't know what's next for me. Everyone else has something to return to. I don't." He was silent for a moment, then turned toward me. His expression was calm, but full of something steady, something that anchored me when I was drifting. "Then come with me." The word struck me like a bell, clear and impossible to ignore. I blinked at him. "With you?" "Yes." His tone was simple, without hesitation. "You don't have to face this alone. My home may not be much, but it's a place to start again. And He paused, searching for the right words. "I don't want you to disappear into loneliness. Not after everything." I stared at him, my mind struggling to wrap itself around the offer. All my life, I had been told to stand on my own, to carry the weight of my family and my responsibilities. But here, in the aftermath of disaster, someone was asking me not to carry it alone. But why? I asked quietly. "Why me?" He gave me a faint smile, one that reached his eyes. "Because when I'm with you, I don't feel like a uniform anymore. I feel like a person. And because you need someone, and maybe I do too." The honesty in his voice unraveled the last of my hesitation. In that moment, I realized that the bond we had formed was not a fleeting comfort born out of tragedy. It was something real, something worth trusting. I nodded slowly, my heart pounding but lighter than it had been in weeks. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll come with you." His relief showed in the way his shoulders eased, the way he touched my arm gently, as though sealing a promise. For the first time since the flood had taken everything, I felt a faint glow of hope. The following days moved quickly. The government continued their efforts to relocate families, and soon my tent was nearly surrounded by emptiness. When the day came for me to leave, he was there, waiting with quiet patience. We didn't carry much, just a small bag of my belongings salvaged from donations and the steady determination in his stride. As we walked away from the camp, I glanced back one last time. The rows of tents that had once felt suffocating now seemed like a chapter closing. Ahead of me lay uncertainty, yes, but not loneliness. The journey to his home was not long, but every step felt like entering a new life. He spoke to me about small things along the way. His neighbors, the quiet street where he lived, the tree outside his window that bloomed in spring. His words painted pictures of a place that sounded nothing like the chaos we had left behind, and everything like the beginning of peace. When we arrived, his home was exactly as he described, simple, modest, but warm in a way the camp could never be. He showed me where I could rest, where I could keep my things, as if it was the most natural thing in the world for me to be there. And, in a way, it was the first night in his home. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the quiet. No crying, no loudspeakers, no restless shuffling of 100 strangers. Just silence, broken only by the faint sounds of him moving in the next room. And for the first time since the flood, I didn't feel the weight of emptiness pressing down on me. Instead, I felt safe. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, I began to rebuild, not with bricks or cement, but with pieces of myself. He helped me find small work in the area, and I contributed to the household in any way I could. We ate meals together, laughed at little things, and shared stories as the evenings grew quiet. He was no longer just the officer who would offer me comfort in a camp. He was a man who had given me a chance to begin again. One afternoon, as we sat on the small veranda of his home, watching children play in the street, he turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about how strange it is that a flood, something meant to destroy, brought us here?" I thought about it, then smiled faintly. Maybe sometimes destruction clears the way for something new. He nodded, his gaze lingering on me with a warmth I could feel in my chest. "Yes," he said, "something worth holding on to." And I knew then that our story wasn't one of loss, but a finding. We had found each other in the darkest of nights, in the cold silence of disaster. And from that unlikely place, we had carved out a bond strong enough to guide us into the light. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real, a new beginning, a chance to heal. And as I sat there beside him, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected connections become the very thing that saves you.